and welcome to the It's Record Time podcast. I am your host, Alex, and this is the show where each week I am joined by a different guest to talk about their favourite albums, biggest influences, and the bands that they love. This week I was joined by UK folk singer Beans on Toast. Beans is one of the nicest and most optimistic people around, so chatting to him was just brilliant, to be perfectly honest. We spent our time talking about Glastonbury Festival, which at the point of recording still looked like it could actually happen, sneaking into shows and rediscovering nature during lockdown. It has become a tradition over the last 10 years or so that Beans releases a new album each year on his birthday, which is the 1st of December, and in 2020 he went one step further and released two. Knee Deep in Nostalgia and The Unforeseeable Future. Both are great, both could be picked up from his website, and there's links to the buying pages for that in the show notes. That's it for me for now. I will be back at the end for a bit more chat. Until then, enjoy! So, how are you? How's your day been? How's your week?
Yeah, you know, the same as the many weeks beforehand. Yeah, all good. You know, been looking after my daughter all day, basically, which is kind of, you know, what I've been doing throughout lockdown, making sure that her life is as big as possible. And then of an evening, either kind of songwriting or talking to new people through the computer about records that I bought and stuff like that. So it's all good.
You know, amazing.
At the same time, I obviously worry about, I almost goes without saying now that everybody's worried about the state of the world as a whole. But, you know, I obviously am concerned, but personally, my day's been tickety-boo.
Are you good with like having free time and stuff? Obviously, the last like 10 months now, or however long it's been, like we've just sort of, are you like able to fill that time? Are you climbing the walls like when you're not looking after your daughter?
He climbs the walls for me. So yeah, I mean, I've kind of throughout the lockdown and pandemic and stuff, I've not been really able to do anything apart from count my blessings. Like I feel really lucky. Like even with it sucks that there was no festivals and gigs and stuff like that, but I worry more for the you know, the 17-year-old who was about to go to his first festival. You know, I've been to enough fucking festivals like for 10 people, so it's like not going for one summer didn't really feel like I was in any position to complain about that, you know. And you know, I've definitely, of course, I've been missing gigs. I actually find that I've been missing gigs has turned into quite a physical thing for me because, like, I have just turned 40, so it might be sort of psychosomatic as well. But I feel I'm kind of aching now, and I think because without touring and gigging, I don't have that kind of like adrenaline bash I used to get so regular, and it wasn't like I'd get particularly nervous about going on stage, but you know, it's always a rush, and not having that for a prolonged, I think is actually, you know, gigging for me is quite healthy, and not having that boost is sort of showing itself in like weird aches and pains. But you know, and if that's all I've got to fucking worry about, you know, it's a bad backs. Then, like I said, you know, I just threw out. I've just been counting my blessings. I moved out of London in between lockdowns.
Okay.
Our landlord gave us a notice, which was a bit of a head spin, but we're outside now on the coast in Kent, and we've got, you know, more room, and yeah, you know, been getting on with stuff, you know, writing and raising my daughter basically.
I'm super jealous of you being by the coast. I grew up on the coast in Essex, and I just miss being by the sea so much. I've lived in London for like 12, 13 years now, but I still miss sort of being near the sea and having that space. And
yeah, it's my wife's from around here, so we kind of came back here. I mean, one thing, it's a stony beach where we live, and I've developed a new obsession with stones. I love them. I had no idea. I've always liked trees, big tree fan, and it's like trees, these really ancient, all-knowing beings. And I was like, fucking stones is the same, man. You know, but they never get a look in. No one ever's like hug a stone or that. So I'm like, I've been writing quite a lot of songs about stones actually, like about the all-knowing story, secret story, like buried in the stones, because there's so fucking many of them. I want to know whether there's as many stones on the beach as there is stars in the sky. I reckon it might be completely, you know, like the exact same amount. which would be good.
You sure you're taking lockdown okay then?
Yeah, mate. I mean, I think if anything, it's exposed to a lot of people how important nature is, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, when we've been cut off from it, I've never heard so many people talk about. You know, back last year, it was like everybody I chatted to was like, "Oh, isn't spring really beautiful?" And there was like, never, you know, people that would never normally say shit like that. So I think that, you know, as and when, you know, the world starts turning again and it's safe to go out, I'd like to think that there will be some lessons learned. And one of them is probably how important our kind of connection with nature is. So go out and hug a stone, guys. That's what I'm saying.
You're like super optimistic anyway. Like, how optimistic are you around 2021 and like festivals coming back and being able to gig again at some point this year? Or like at the time of recording this, with just about a week into another national lockdown, and you know it's all a bit gloomy and everything's dark and awful. And
yeah, I mean, I've rescheduled my album launch. It was going to be in December. That is now going to be, then was going to be in January, and now we've moved it to April, which is, I guess, an optimistic look. And I sort of said to everybody who's bought tickets, if we have to keep on moving this, you know, then we will. I think everybody's trying to second guess what's going to happen, and I'm definitely not, you know, not the person to ask because of my sort of like a brazen optimism. I mean, I had in between lockdowns, I did quite a lot of gigs. There was there was that small couple of weeks where you was allowed to play to people sat down in groups of 6, and just because the nature of the music that I make, everybody wanted to fucking book me, you know, because it was like, who can play to a sit down crowd and you still sell booze, you know? So it was like, I was the ideal candidate for these sort of like socially distant gigs. So I did a load of them, and I was sort of taken by the being able to play again and being out there. And I was on stage being like, the way out of this is going to be so much easier than the way in, you know, like the end is in sight. Like, and I really, you know, I particularly believed then that was it. And obviously it hasn't been. And now if you ask me, I'll say that this is, you know, there is like the end time. Although to back up that claim, I remember at the start seeing a kind of, you know, the kind of the language about second spike and mutations and shit like that was there from the get-go. And there was, I remember at the very start saying like, this is how the graphs normally go. You know, like, they're little bounce and there's a massive one. And this could happen. This is the worst possible scenario of what could happen. And it feels like the fucking worst possible scenario has already happened now, isn't it? The second spike's gone fucking nuts. That it's mutated to make it more transmittable. It's like, all right. So, you know, I can't remember hearing anything else that wasn't the worst case scenario that we haven't now gone through, and now we're just on the road back. You heard it here first.
So any sort of optimistic predictions you make during this chat, we're just going to assume that they're going to be correct, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, you could also look at my sort of like sort of political history, if you will. There hasn't been a major sort of political decision or referendum or vote that it's never gone the way that I've sort of, you know, wanted it to or sung about. So sometimes I think about that, you know.
I'm trying to stay optimistic. Like I was filled with less hope last week when Glastonbury came out and said that they'll hold tickets back for 2022 again. And I was like, if they've had that conversation, I'm now worried that my sort of experience with Paul and Taylor and all of the rest of it's going to be off the cards for another year.
Yeah, I mean, Glasgow have kind of, if anyone can do it, they can. And I think they're in a great position to kind of rewrite the rule book for everybody else, because everybody loves Glastonbury. They can kind of like, the bands love it, you know, people that buy everyone would do anything to make Glastonbury happen, more so than any. And they've also got the greatest, you know, sort of production team on the planet, effectively. So I think they're generally up for a challenge. I think it'd be great if, you know, if it was something they could do and it was like, this is how we're going to do it, because it's at the start of the summer. Yeah. And if Glastonbury can fucking pull it off, then it will give everybody else the, you know, the confidence to go through. But, you know, who knows? You just feel like a fool now, isn't it? You know, I've cancelled enough gigs and ridden it through. But, you know, it will come back and it will be, you know, glorious when it does, right? I mean, that's also what I got from the kind of gigs that I did in between lockdowns, where not a lot of people saw that. You sort of went out and, you know, people were ready to be with people again.
So much. Every time a gig's come on sale, sort of within about 50 miles of me in the last sort of 8 months now, I've gone, well, I'm going to buy a ticket because I'm going to go to everything as soon as everything reopens. Like,
I mean, that could sort of, save a lot of asses as well, couldn't it? And again, it's this thing of learning what's important to us, be it nature and culture, where perhaps things that were taken for granted won't be in the new world.
So I tell you, you're the absolute like tonic I need to talk to on a daily basis, Beans.
And I actually thought, we're doing a podcast. It's not about fucking COVID as well. Just get to talk about other people's music, and here we are. It's impossible to not talk about it, though, isn't it?
I know. I've recorded a few of these over the last few weeks, and every single time I'm like, we're not going to talk about COVID. We just end up talking about COVID. So we're going to.
Yeah, you can't say how are you without getting someone's fucking 2 pence worth on it, basically, can you? So let's get stuck into some records.
Before we get stuck into other people's records, I'm going to talk about your records for a minute. So end of 2020, you released 2 records.
Yeah.
You had The Unforeseeable Future and Knee Deep in Nostalgia. The Unforeseeable Future was like a super focus on the pandemic and very much based in the present, whilst like Knee Deep in Nostalgia was like an album about you, basically, and like your past and your history. Like, how did those 2 albums come to be?
Well, Knee Deep in Nostalgia was the album that would have happened anyway. It was coming out on my 40th birthday, and I kind of wanted to have kind of an album about sort of walking down memory lane. And I had all of those songs that are on the record, and Frank Turner produced it, and that was always the plan. We had that all locked down, and I was just writing towards that record, basically. And then I had all of them songs in March, basically. All of those songs were written in March, and then when everything, when the rug got pulled from beneath our feet. I didn't. When I picked up my guitar, I wasn't really like feeling whimsically walking down memory lane. I was writing about, and I instantly, when lockdown hit, I started writing, and I was like releasing at the same time. I'd kind of sit at home, write a song, make a video for it, and release, which was just sort of the fact that you could do that, I thought was incredible. And I just cut like. It was a real knee-jerk reaction to tragedy for me was writing, basically. And I just kept writing and releasing. And then it was like, I've got to think about releasing too much music anyway. It's hard to get people to listen, especially if you can't. So I was like, started holding some songs back. And there was just, the songs just weren't going to marry themselves, on an album. And very early on, it was like, well, it's going to be 2 different records. I wouldn't have wanted to, because the songs that I were putting out were like just me recorded on my phone, in actual quarantine. And I wouldn't want to then go to a studio and try and re-record that and re-summon up that energy for that song. So it was just like, right, just do all the songs recorded at home. And then me and Frank, again, we did it in between lockdowns. I just went round to his and we worked on his laptop and sort of did the other record like that. And yeah, so it was like, Knee Deep in Nostalgia would have happened anyway. And then The Unforeseeable Future is basically a kind of knee-jerk reaction to what happened in, this year. And it was just like, put them both out. It's sort of what you wanted to listen to on the day as well. Some people like, surrounding themselves in what's going on. Some people use music to forget the fuck about everything. And I kind of had both of them sorted.
So you said sort of your 40th birthday was in December when you released the records. Was that the catalyst then to sort of having that nostalgic album then? Because like a lot of your stuff is like, it's normally focused in the here and now. And it's, it's that folk thing of telling stories about what's going on in your life in the present. Yeah,
more and more now I find that my past albums, like the album that I've just finished writing, will kind of push me on to do the next one. Like the album before Knee Deep was an album called The Inevitable Trainwreck. And that was all about like the rise of AI, climate change, the collapse of civilization and all that. And, I fucking, at the end, I was like, I can't write any more songs about the end of the world. It's fucking doing my head in. So I was like, I can't, and I sort of had to I was like, right, I just want to write about, easy, fun stuff. And then I think I maybe the first song on the album, I wrote that first and was like, wow, like going all the way back to singing about being 10 years old. It's just like, I think then I had the name for the album and it just kind of conjured it up there. But I find more and more now I write in sort of albums as a body of work. Like the album will have an overarching theme to it. And then I'll be off the back of that, it will be like I said, I can't write about that anymore and sort of move into a different space. So that's kind of how it happened, yeah. Obviously, I ended up writing a whole nother album about the end of the world, but that weren't my fault.
So I was listening to Knee Deep in Nostalgia the day it came out back in December, and one of the tracks on the album is called The Album of the Day. And as soon as I heard that track, I was like, oh, I'm going to email Beans, see if he wants to come on this podcast and talk. Because a key part of that song is about albums that are important to you and like sharing music with your daughter and stuff. So I was like, yeah, this feels like a real like great opportunity to sort of tie these things in as well. So I'm really glad you wanted to come on. So should we crack on with some other people's records?
Let's do it.
So the first one I wanted to start off with was your first purchase. Can you tell us what it is and when you got it?
The Simpsons Sing the Blues. And I looked at this online to kind of check, but I got it when it came out in 1990, so I would have been 10 years old. And it's probably like, as much as that was the first record that I bought, it wasn't like that was any kind of introduction to music for me. It was very, you know, my parents were avid music fans, like insane music fans. My mum was like the Beatlemaniac, you know, like running around after the Beatles every day of her teenage life. And my dad, you know, both had huge record collections, and which they sold. They kept with the time, sold and bought CDs, you know, and like. But so I never really needed to purchase music of, you know, to go out and do. And when I did, I ended up buying this, you know, set, which again on the cusp seems like a really naff first purchase, but when you dig a bit deeper, it wasn't a shit comic album. It was like it was like Chuck Berry was on there, Dr. John. It was
like BB King's on it.
BB King. and none of the songs were on The Simpsons either. They was all like standalone songs kind of in their own right. And it's not like I particularly loved the album, you know, it wasn't like nonstop. It was just, I remember it being the kind of beginning of something, because it was like, well, I don't just have to listen to my dad's Randy Travis records, which ended with me listening to Wu-Tang Clan, basically, which is about far away from, you know, from 80s country as you can get.
I always really love it when the first purchase question comes up and people talk about it, because people have that reaction being like, yeah, it's not a cool album, like, and no one's first record is cool, like,
yeah, and if they're telling you that it is, they're lying.
Absolute liars. So you said that like this wasn't an album that got you into music at all, it was like your parents and stuff. What was that stuff you were listening to when you were sort of like around this age and a little bit older, like when you first started buying your own records?
Like Randy Travis, he was kind of like of the kind of ilk of like Garth Brooks country, like 80s country, overproduced, like really ballady songs. And just almost without, you know, access to anything else. It was just what my dad played in the car. I loved Randy Travis, you know, like, and his kind of really soppy, sentimental love songs, very similar to what I write now, you know, and that whole kind of like, there's a thing about that kind of country where it's like the lyrics, you know exactly what the song is about. It's not like they're sort of painting a picture with words, or it's like poetic, or this is a song about a thing, and we're going to tell the story of the thing in the song. And again, that's very much, you know, what I still do to this day. I mean, I also had like throughout my life, like I'd hear songs like I know that my dad used to play me a lot of Tom Waits and stuff like that. That at the time just kind of were going through me, but when I'd hear them, I'd be like, I know this song. Hang on a minute, and so yeah. But I think I knew all the words and still do to Randy Travis. And, you know, if anybody was like, you know, yeah, he was my favorite.
Was there much stuff from like the 90s then? So you were a teenager across the 90s. So presumably like some of that stuff like fed in?
Yeah. I mean, so, you know, that was what, you know, I guess before kind of school and shit like that. And then through I mean, it was so different back then because you didn't really like you the music that you listened to kind of defined who you was, and it was almost like you couldn't listen to anything else. So I gave up on country music and I started listening to gangster rap, you know, which is it was such a phenomenon, and it was so strange because as a 12-year-old in Braintree in Essex, I didn't really have much in common with, you know, sort of gangsters in LA, but I fucking felt it, and I wrote raps. Me and my mate used to write raps about having bitches and AK-47s and all this shit, and it's like, you know, we were two virgins, you know, living in a village. Like there's and it was just a strange phenomenon. I mean, it must have been because the actual production of the music was so groundbreaking that it kind of took the world by storm, and you didn't need to be able to relate to it. But I listened to hip hop sort of like avidly throughout the first part of the 90s, and then becoming slightly disillusioned with the raps I was writing. I think almost like I got off the hip hop train and got on the kind of grunge train, like quite late, like after Kurt Cobain had died and whatnot. But like it was through Placebo, I guess. Really, that was like, you know, I listened to Placebo and was just like, feels like this music's a bit more me.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean. And then you know, before you know it, I had rips in my jeans and I'd painted my fingernails, and you know, and you know, and we started a band, and it was like it felt easier to write songs in that ilk than it did, you know, I'm a gangster and I'm coming to shoot you.
So you always sort of writing songs and stuff, and you said you were in a band when you were a teenager. Like, is that always?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the little raps, and then at the minute that it was like, well, okay, if we're going to not listen to hip hop and we're going to listen to grunge, like, let's start a band, you know. And none of us could play the band that we played in at school. But we sort of told everybody about the band and graffitied the name on the toilet. It was like, yeah. And then it was like, fuck, what the bands do? Like, we need to work out how to play some instruments. And that was, but even then I knew, I was like, well, I'm going to be the singer, but not because I particularly wanted to sing, more because I wanted to come up with the words and what was being said. So, and there, you know, it's like three really good mates, and, you know, Dave played the drums, Jot played the bass, and that was it. And then, you know, we just kind of didn't ask anybody how to do it, and you know, I mean, we played 2 gigs before we knew that you had to play the same notes with the bass and the guitar. Like our first gigs, Jot just used to be like, "This is a cool bass line," and I just be like, "Yeah, this is a cool guitar line," and just sort of singing over the top. And I mean, you know, bless us. But I kind of think I think that if I saw someone doing that now, I would go up and be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like, you can't do that. Like, but nobody did.
Was music like sort of all encompassing for you, or is there like other stuff going on as well? Like you've spoken on the album about how you did like plays and stuff when you were in school. Like
drugs was definitely the other thing.
Drugs were a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we used to, again, I think I started smoking weed the same time I started listening to The Doors. And them two went fucking hand in hand, you know. I thought I was Jim Morrison for a spell, and that through that kind of wanting to come up with words and stuff like that was through, you know, obsessing over Jim Morrison's lyrics, and that, you know, yeah, I think that was probably, you know, drugs, sort of like, you know, like girlfriends and music, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Should we say that was my teenage years? But little did I know at the time. Yeah.
Based on like your songwriting and like seeing you on stage and stuff, like I wanted to know if like comedy was like a big thing for you as well, because like you've mentioned this wordplay thing and like being interested in the way the words are formed, and your songs are always very like there's like a proper dry wit in your music as well. So I didn't know if that was influenced at all, or was that just like a natural thing?
I sound bad saying it because, you know, each their own, all that, but I'm just not a fan of stand-up comedy, like at all. I mean, I love like Bill Hicks and like George Carlin and stuff like that, but early on when I first started, I'd quite often be kind of like paired up on sort of variety bills with a couple of comedians myself, and I kind of, not that I sort of said no, but I sort of dodged out. I sort of purposely went down a different route than that, because, yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously I try, you know, got to have a sense of humor in songs, but yeah, I find it quite a different thing than kind of stand up, basically.
I can see why people would sort of try and marry sort of what you're doing with putting you on the same bills as stand-ups and stuff. But I can imagine, like, as a musician, you're going, no, I'm different to that.
Yeah, I think it was. Sound like a right dick. I just like, I didn't want to go and play my show and then leave, you know, like, because I wasn't into what was going on afterwards. It just didn't really felt like to me, it didn't feel like that's what I was doing, basically.
I'm going to move us on from first purchase to most recent purchase. Can you tell us what it is and name of the album?
Yeah, John Prine and the Tree of Forgiveness. And I mean, in all fairness, I don't purchase little to no music, you know, and the only reason that I did purchase that record was because I went to the in-store that John Prine did at Rough Trade off the back of the record. I mean, to me, you know, John Prine's one of, you know, the greatest song, you know, if not the greatest songwriter for me personally. Obviously he passed away this year, which has kind of got all of the, you know, all the emotions and all the songs going up. But like, I mean, again, there was another person that my dad used to play me. And when I very first started Beans on Toast, I was obsessed with a John Prine live album, which had loads of stories. He like chatted as much as he played, and was like, his songs were funny and simple. And I think the reason that he's so important for me personally is I love him as a songwriter and I love his songs, but I also, if I reel off other songwriters that I really love, like sort of more modern songwriters like Todd Snyder or Tyler Childers or Conor Oberst, like these are all children of John Prine. And you know that because he took them on tour. You know, they did collaborations. John Prine was also wonderful for, you know, laying his, you know, putting his arm out for other folk singers and, you know, and expressing gratitude towards them. And you could see that from a distance. And he was just like, he feels like, and sort of looks like a guy that never really put a foot wrong, which is cool. Like, and even, you know, he was touring that last album and he knew it was his last album. You know, the last song on his last album is called When I Get to Heaven, and it's all just like how it's all been a joke and how it's going to be more of a joke. When he gets there, he's going to have a drink and smoke a big cigarette and have a party. And during the Rough Trade gig, it was like, you know, really honored to be there, like tiny little crowd. He was like playing, and this fucking like the alarm goes off in Rough Trade halfway through a really sentimental song, like woo, 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 it's fucking kicking off. And he's just like, it doesn't bat an eyelid. And he just carries on playing. It stops, and the whole audience breathe a sigh of relief. And he just carries on. It goes again, and everyone, you know, like when you can feel a crowd getting infuriated, and he weren't phased at all. And then at the end, he was like, "Sure hope they're trying to steal my album." And it was like, ah, yes, he still got it. Fuck. Like, and it was amazing, you know. And then, you know, obviously, in him passing away this year, and I think, again, like me writing that whole album, The Unforeseeable Future, that was, you know, finding out that John Prine had just died in a time when all songwriters were sent back to their, you know, to the drawing board. It was quite a sort of like a godlike move, actually. Because it was like, if anybody who writes songs was short of an idea, just, you know, you could pick up a job. And the thing is, because I don't really play other people's songs, like I just can't. I find them really difficult. But John Prine's, I can, and in the same way of that, I can. The only people whose songs I might play on guitar are the people that I would call the children of John Prine. Like I said, Tyler Childers, where it's like basically 3 chords. You know, it's tied up afterwards, but you could just ramp it out and just get a vibe and just go with it. So yeah, Tree of Forgiveness was my last purchase, and you know, and like I said, I only really bought it because I was there, but I would be listening to it on Spotify or whatnot.
I was listening to John today, and like, his voice is just like that incredible, like really gravelly tone to it. And yeah, I didn't know this album. I'd listened to like a little bit of John in the past, but I hadn't sat down and done like this album front to back. And it's really like, as like a last album, it's good. Like as an 18th album, like fuck, like yeah. Who can produce 18 albums worth of great stuff? Like it's really strong.
There's a wisdom to what he does, and always has been. I think like even when you look at how he started, like he basically got up on stage and started playing because it just in retaliation to no one being any good at his local bar. He was like, "Oh, this guy's shit." Someone was like, "Go on, and you do better." And he was like, "All right." And he got up and played. And then, 3 months later, that pub was rammed every Wednesday night. And then, and then a record label came down and said, "Hey, do you want to make a record?" And it didn't even, if he didn't go drinking in that bar that night, none of this would have happened almost. Which again, it just a great. Just a wisdom, which sounds like he lived by the wisdom in his life, and it come across in his songs.
So you said that you only picked this one up like physically because it was like part of that in-store thing. So you predominantly do everything digitally, and do you have the classics on record or the classics on tape or whatever, then everything else is just done through Spotify?
I have like my iTunes account with all my MP3s from, I was for a long time, I was an Apple Music man, but like more recently I've sort of switched to, I kind of bounce between old MP3s on iTunes and Spotify, but I got nowhere to play a CD. I've got my record player, the one that features in the album of Day video, is a lot more visually pleasing than it is, it's better on the eyes than it is on the ears. And that's just, my brother got that, and it like, throwing out, like when he was clearing houses, he just took it from a house, and I won it from him in a game of cards actually. And so I keep looking over my shoulder because it's just behind me. And I don't really ever listen to music on vinyl. I find I'm a bit too careless for vinyl. Like it just scratches easy, and you're supposed to put it back in the thing after you listen to it and all that shit. It's just like, I just find it quite hard work, and if I listen to music, I listen on through a streaming service, of course. Yeah.
I was on your web store a few days ago looking at your stuff on record, and I remembered I read somewhere recently that your mum and dad run your like merch stuff in your web store. They
did pre lockdown. I've had to bring it back in house for the new album, but yeah, historically they did. It was. And it was a great little setup, because it was like, at the time when we started off, it was like, all right, didn't sell anything online. And then my wife, who's really good at that stuff, she was like, I'm going to set up your shop and you can sell stuff online. I was like, just sounds like fucking hard work, And it was like, I was just, I'm the sort of person that if you give me something to say, can you put this in the post box? I'll fucking find it in my bag 3 weeks later. And it's just like everything's geared up to me to provide a really bad service. And weirdly, I was sort of having a whinge about it to my mother-in-law, and she said, I could do it for you. I'll happily do it. And I was like, no, I can't have you doing my merch. I was like, but I could definitely get my folks to do it. And I sort of, my dad had recently, they're both retired, and I just sort of went back and was like, look, I've got an idea. I mean, of course I pay them for it. But it was like, because it's kind of like, it's not like a job. It's just like you need to do a little bit of something every day, and they took it on board. They're amazing. I mean, the customer service, although to begin with, because I was like, right, I'm not doing anything then. It was perfect. No, my wife taught them how to do it, and then they just cracked on. And then somehow I got looped into an email, and my mum had been signing off the emails, Mummy Beans. Like, never once have I called her mummy. Never. I mean, like, and I couldn't, but I was like, what? We got to reel this in. Like, maybe I do need to be more involved. So I sort of put a stop to the Mummy Beans shit. And, but yeah, they were great here. But with the new album, and because what we'd normally do for albums is we'd all go somewhere together. Yeah. And because I'd have to sign them and blah, blah, blah. So we'd have like album day. But yeah, it's been moved. We obviously, not being able to see family and whatnot, so we haven't done that for this record. But yeah, generally very much a cottage industry, as they say.
So if anyone orders anything and it comes late, it's on you, not your mum right now then?
Mate, I mean, that's a whole different
Not that I'm pointing fingers or...
Yeah, well, no, it has. I mean, the mailing out of this record has been fucking a nightmare, and like people have been very patient because it's, it's mail services down, it's Brexit, you name it, it's hard to get post out. And the kind of irony of it all is that there's a song on the album called Patience, with a question mark. And it's like, you buy an album. Some people have bought the album when I put the pre-orders up in, the beginning of October. And you know, the album's been out a month, they're politely emailing saying like, well, I'm still waiting. And I'm like, I don't know where it is. But we sent out enough second copies. But so if you're listening and you're waiting on a record, yes, I mean, it is on me to a certain extent. I've done as much as I can physically do. And I'm better now at, you know, we've got our systems down, should I say. Click and drop, motherfucker. Click and drop.
Right. So for our next category, I'm going to keep us with singer-songwriters for a moment. So we're going to go with the album that you recommend to everyone. Can you tell us what you've gone with?
The album that I'd recommend people listen to is an album called Keep 'Em on Their Toes by Brent Cobb. It's a new record. It came out last year. And I guess if you're going to recommend music to people, it's always good to recommend new stuff. He's American singer. It's like Georgian singer, I think, based in Nashville. And I mean, this album in particular is so nice. Like it's so like about like peace on earth, basically, you know, about like, and it's about get off your soapbox, get together. It's all about love and family, and you know, and it comes from a lot of the time. You know, you see all this fucking white supremacist bullshit going on, and it kind of looks like a country and western gig sometimes, you know. And it's like, so surely if anybody, you know, like can maybe get through to, you know, to these people, and perhaps, you know, using a medium that they're used to, like country music, and to know that there's this kind of like hippie there, basically, in the country music thing, kind of, you know, and doing really well. I don't even know where I first heard his music at, to be honest. His last album was really good as well, Shine On Rainbow. I don't know who put me onto it in the first place, but yeah, I was kind of excited for the record to come out, and it's been pretty solid. And yeah, I'd recommend it to people because it's feel good in the times of trouble, and it's new, basically.
Like he's another one that's just got this amazing voice. Like he's got this really cool southern drawl to it, and like he's only like in his mid-30s, but I was listening to the album earlier and I was like, oh, this guy must be like in his 50s or whatever. Like he's got that sound to his voice. Like,
yeah, sort of. Again, it's a wisdom, I think.
Yeah,
and a kind of yeah, it's just sort of like, I don't know. It's very pro as well. I find like the production of all his albums and stuff like that are just like, fuck, you know, like incredible playing. I reckon that the players are old dudes, if you know what I mean. Like, I reckon he's got like the Nashville old guard on there, and he's just like, I think it's that kind of vibe. Like everybody likes him. I reckon it's like, oh, Brent, my man. Like, yeah, great album.
So like you're like firmly part of that like folk scene now, and like you've been playing shows and festivals for years in and around like this sort of music. Like, how did you start sort of playing these songs, and when did you decide it would just be like you and a guitar doing sort of these story-driven sort of folk country-esque songs?
It was at Glastonbury, actually.
Yeah.
The band that I was telling you about earlier, kind of, we moved to London and it sort of fell to pieces. And off the back of me kind of learning how to promote the band, I started running club nights. And me and Dave, the drummer from the band, were just running club nights for years. And it was like, it was a good time, basically. It was like, fuck, we don't even need to play gigs. We put on other people's bands, you know, like, and throughout all of that, I was always writing, but never really. It wasn't like at school where it's like, we need to write these songs to get out of Braintree, or it was like, fuck, this is just, you know, we're having a party. There's no need. So I was always writing, and loosely, I had like a whole bunch of songs, and I'd started when the first band, I used to sing in an American accent, you know, as was the way for a lot of bands in the, you know, like singing this sort of high pitched American accent. And I met someone, I was playing some of my songs, and I was like, fuck, why'd you sing in such a stupid voice? And no one I'm quite a hard person to take criticism. I know that about myself, and like, no one had sort of pulled me up on it. And this guy was just like, why the fuck do you sound like an idiot? Like, because it's not how you talk. And I was like, what? And he's like, I ended up living with this guy for a bit, and he sort of drilled out of me. And I was like, you know what? He's fucking right. And like, and in order to sort of banish the American accent out of my voice. I sort of started writing these really English songs, and I was like doing that, and I had quite a collection of them, and I was like, right, I'm going to start a band, and this is going to be the band. And I think Beans on Toast was the name that I sort of had planned for the band, and I think I'd even spoke to a few mates and had a bit of a plan for it in my head when I went to Glastonbury, and it wasn't even like an open mic. There was just this guy that was doing sort of solo stuff, and his guitar was just left, and he was sort of said, "Oh, you know, if anybody wants to play," and I was like, "I'll go and do my song." And you know, I got up, and by the time I was halfway through the first song, it's like, "Fuck," you know, I don't need a band at all. This is it. Like, and it was singing songs about getting hammered at festivals to hammered people at a festival, you know. So it worked, and it was like, and off the back of that, you know, and off the back of that, someone was like, "Could I book you another show at Glastonbury this weekend?" And it was like, game on, you know, off we go, and that was it. And it became, so I definitely didn't sort of think about it or plan it as that way, and it meant that everything, because I'd also managed bands as well, so I knew about the kind of, you know, the decision making process and the kind of managing of diary and stuff like that around, you know, 4 or 5 people in their sort of late 20s or whatever. So it's like, fuck, if I can do this by myself and I can make every decision and do every gig without involving anybody else. And then there's, you know, the truth of the matter is that the only reason I've been able to do it for so long and you know, and it's now my livelihood, is that there's only one mouth to feed, you know, like you can do it cheap basically, you know, like, and you know, yeah, because there's only one mouth to feed basically. So it's like, there's no way that if I hadn't have got up on Glastonbury and had started a band, we would, I mean, you know, who fucking knows, but if it had gone down a similar path, it would have been very, very difficult for a 4-piece band to have done what I did, because for the first 3 or 4 years, you know, I was still running clubs and still had, you know, I was doing gigs because I wanted to, not because I needed to. And I think that was the initial draw for why people liked watching me play, because I was like, this guy's fucking hammered and he don't give a shit. Like, he literally looks like he doesn't care less. And it's like, and I kind of didn't. Not I didn't care about the songs, but you know, like there wasn't any. Yeah. I wasn't after anything bigger, or there wasn't a sort of master plan, and that was like ended up being the kind of, you know, the master plan, it turns out.
So how did like the folk scene sort of welcome you then? Was it like a welcoming place, or were they like ever hostile to you because, as you say, you would like seemingly not giving a shit and you were singing about sort of taking drugs and using like language that they probably wouldn't normally use? Like, was there ever like a bit of a clash there?
I mean, to me, when you say folk scene, I think of like Trowbridge Festival and like Cambridge Folk Festival and stuff like that, which, you know, I've never really, as much as I was supposed to play Cambridge this year, I've never really been in that world at all. You know, if I was in a scene, it was, you know, London basically, and it was indie bands, and then at the same time, yeah, there was like Mumford and Sons, and you know, obviously Frank Turner, and then there was Noah Noel and stuff like that. But it wasn't like anybody that went exactly next door to the Maccabees or Block Party, or it wasn't like people were here to make folk music. It was like people were here to make the music whatever they want. It's, you know, it's London, and it was very, the bills would be varied. You know, I don't ever think there was much of a sort of like all, and there certainly wasn't any, you know, sort of like, cool, you can't do that around here. I mean, fuck, you could say, where does anybody, you know, anybody says that in any music venue, you know, or under any guise of a gig, and it's, you know, it's a bad gig.
So that's like the North London scene, like the Camden scene. Like, is that like the mid 2000s where like all of these bands were coming up at the same time? It seemed like a really great time for British music. Yeah, like JT coming through at that time as well, and
exactly that. I was sort of living in and running a venue on Holloway Road called Nambucca.
Yeah,
and you know, and everybody played there, and that was all. My whole first album was written in Nambucca, basically upstairs, and the place was pretty notorious. And you know, I just put myself. Initially, I started just putting myself when bands didn't show up, I'd play, or if a band that I really loved were coming through, I'd put myself as support and stuff like that. And there's definitely like a world, you know, where Nambuka didn't burn down and I'm still there, playing in support to whatever band's passing through, just doing loads of gack and talking nonsense. But, the place burned down and we all sort of, scattered into the wind and, went our separate ways. And, and it was obviously it's at Nambuka that I met Frank, and him taking me on tour, and, the doors that he's opened for me are kind of endless, basically.
So the next category I'm going to ask you about is your most played album ever. And I'm just sort of transitioning into it now because I think the person whose album it is would have been, Kay would have been part of that scene as well. And like,
yes,
similar sort of.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, there was that. Yeah, it was that for me. I first saw Kay at the at Glastonbury again. My always boils down to fucking Glastonbury, doesn't it? But I just walked past the tent and heard Sound of Rum playing inside. I was just walking. I was like, what the fuck is this? No one in there. Like playing to like 6 or 7 people, and just loved it, and walked straight up to them as you can when a band played to 6 or 7 people. It was like, hey, and and I'm lucky enough to be friends ever since, and watched Sound of Rum turn into Kay doing her solo stuff, and then I think my favourite ever Glastonbury gig was the Jazz. It's not called Jazzwood, West Holt's stage a couple of years ago, and seeing them play to so few people, and then this incredible, and the reason I've put it down as my most, so Let Them Eat Chaos is my favorite album, and the reason it's so listened to is because I'd never put that album on as like background listening.
When I think about my most played albums, it's stuff that like I can play in any situation, but like Let Them Eat Chaos is like, it's such a good album, but it's not an album I'm going to put on like when I'm working or when I'm like commuting. I have to sit down and listen to it.
Yeah, it definitely is. You need your full attention, or you might as well not bother, basically. Yeah. And I think that's why I can keep returning to it, because if I'm looking for a kind of background music, I'll put on something new. I kind of pass through music quite quickly. I'll play something to death if I like it, and then I don't really want to hear it again, unless it's an album like Let Them Eat Chaos, where it's like, I'm still not really sure I know what's going on. I'm desperate to find, like, you can listen to it and be like, oh yeah, wow, they're connected through that there. So I think that's what makes it kind of like timeless in my head. And it's like, and it's also, from doing a lot of driving as well, like if you're in a long drive back, like with other people in the car, I sort of pride myself in my sort of in-van DJing as well, like to people, and it's like there's a certain mood in the air when it's like, and you never say, hey, I've got something I want you to listen to or anything like that. You just Let Them Eat Chaos, and you just no one talks. And that's it. No one talks, and then people kind of come out the other side, and again, it's not even people like go, God, that was good, or anything like that. It's just like, and then you just put on Brent Cobb, and just lighten the mood again and go through. But yeah, I think that the kind of integrity of it makes it timeless for me.
Kay's always been very open about their politics, like in much the same way that you have been. Like, how do you feel that politics and music what do you feel that relationship should be?
I don't think "should" is the word, is it? It's like I think if you want to speak up and talk about something, then go right ahead. But I don't think it's anybody's duty as a musician or an artist to kind of like, well, you have to say something. And I also think that, I think probably the biggest kind of political move in music, over the last couple of years is probably like the K-pop fans when they bought all the tickets to the Trump rally. And it was like, the music is, I don't even know anything about K-pop, but I doubt it's political music, and it's like, but to be able to, there's me, at Extinction Rebellion march singing about polar ice caps melting, and then there's like K-pop emptying a fucking Tulsa rally for Trump, and it's like that, like that's fucking massive. That's the kind of shit that, and if you can do stuff like that, great. I can see also why people don't want to get stuck into it, but I just think, I suppose the flip side would be like, if you're not you know, if you're not saying anything, then, you know, what are you saying? Why bother? Like, a little bit.
Do you react well to that label? Like, a lot of people will label you as like a political troubadour or whatever. Like, do you?
Yeah, I'm sure I've written it on my own fucking press releases over the years. Like, I mean, only in the sense that, again, I think that boils back down to my songs being, knowing what they're about, you know, like, and it's what isn't political. Again, I mean, like, is singing a song about how chickens are farmed a political song, or is it just something you was thinking about one day about when you was eating chicken, you know, like, but because it's clear what the song is about, it's like, oh, people, I don't know, I'm not afraid of telling people how I think, you know, you get, and I'm not saying that I'm right in any of my songs, you know, I do try and sort of alliterate that as well. It's not like I have all the answers or any shit like that. It's just like, this is how I feel about these certain things. And I guess, you know, politics comes into it. I mean, I feel like I've definitely got more sort of love songs and songs about nature and songs about, you know, sort of culture and stuff like that than I have songs about politics. But yeah, no one sort of said, you know, I don't know how I'd feel about like the love singer.
That's exclusively how I'm going to refer to you as now.
Mr. Loverman.
That's the name of the episode. That's it.
Yeah.
So the final pick for album is album with the most interesting backstory. What's the album and what's the backstory to it?
How long have you got?
I've got as long as you have.
The album is The Software Slump by Grandaddy. And I'm actually working on my my second book at the moment, and one of the stories in it is about Grandaddy. So when you said interesting backstory, I was like, well, fucking hell, I've been freshening this one up. But back when I first moved to London, again, what was this, very early 2000s, I used to work as like a flyer guy, and, you know, through lack of funds, I used to basically sneak into gigs. And my way of getting into gigs, I used to go to gigs at the Astoria in the West End. And I'd turn up, I used to call it the 5 o'clock blag. And I'd turn up at 5 o'clock with a pen and a paper. And I'd just go to the door and be like, I'm here from Viper magazine to interview the band. And because like the promoter hadn't shown up or the security or hadn't shown up, it was just like a dude that used to sit on the door at the Astoria, and he'd just nod me in. And I'd go in and sit and hide in the toilets until 7 o'clock when the doors opened, and I'd just go to the gig for free. And I did it a lot. Like, and I got really cocky with it. In the end, I wasn't even hiding in the toilets. I was just like, just go in. I just realized that if you look like you're supposed to be there, nobody questioned it. You know, you just walk around nodding at people. All right. I'm just like learning about sound checks and shit. And Grandaddy, who were my fucking favorite band at the time. And again, not to sort of hark back too much, but it's like, I was obsessed with the band, but I knew nothing about them. I had their first album on CD. I had Under the Western Freeway. They weren't in any music magazines that I'd ever seen. Like, I'd never seen a photograph of them. I didn't know where they was from. Not that I cared. That was kind of how you sort of listen to music back then. But I loved this album. And they were playing at the Dingwalls. In Camden. So I was like, I'd never done the 5 o'clock blag at such a small venue. It works because of the bigness of the venue. But I was like, because I was so nervous about not getting in and a small venue, I was kind of off my game a little bit. But like, I walked in, and rather than being like, oh, I'm here from this guy was like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm here to interview the band. And then he was like, okay, 1 second. Their press officer came over. And basically she was like, oh, right. I was like, I'm here from before. Normally I'd be like, oh yeah, from Viper magazine, really cocky. And then I was like this nervous little kid. I was like, oh, I'm here from Viper magazine. It's like a student magazine. And she was like, well, she got her fucking schedule out. And she's like, oh, I've not seen you on the schedule. And she went, all right, the guys are ready now, actually. Do you want to just come through and do it? So I walked through following this fucking woman and sat in the dressing room. And I was like, I just sat down, and Grandaddy got like, turns out they're like big guys, like farmers, like with with massive beards, like baseball caps. So like I just went into this tiny little dressing room and sat down with my pen and paper, and I started to interview them, and I was just like, fuck, I can't do it. You know, like I'll just come clean. And I was just like, look, I don't work for a magazine. I use this as a blank to get into gigs. I love your band, but I thought they'd be like, yeah, man, fucking high five. Cool. And they were like, what? Why don't you buy a ticket like everyone else? And I was like, well, I don't have any money, man. Like, and in the end, they was like, all right, they said, here's the deal. Because they was promoting the Software Slump, their new album, which was out the following week. And they basically put me to work in exchange for being able to see the gig. And they had all these posters that had the wrong date printed. And the singer, Jason Light, he was like, if you rip off the corner of all these posters, so the wrong date's gone, and you put the posters up, you can stay and watch the gig. And I'll tell you, I fucking put the stack of posters was like that big. In the ding walls, there wasn't a piece of wall that didn't have a poster on it. I did the fucking ceiling, like just went to town on it. And the merch stand was like a shrine to the Software Slump. And they gave me a free copy of the album at the end of the gig. And I was like, thank you. It weren't even out, So I got it early and listened to it. Still a good record.
Yeah, I'm so glad I left that till last, like as a category. That's an incredible story.
Like I said, it's fresh in my mind because I've been writing it up. So,
so the album itself, like I listened to it today, and like it's a really good album. Like it's a really slow, atmospheric album, and like there's not a happy song on there.
No, it's like, but it's kind of like they're so mysterious. Like I said, I knew so little about them, and it was kind of like really futuristic, but also kind of like a desert or something like that as well. It's like nature, and like the gig at the at Dingwalls, they'd like had fucking loads of shrubbery. They'd like just like pulled down trees on the like in the afternoon. It seemed, and like gaffer taped them around the stage, and they had loads of like really old keyboards. There's a lot of sounds, and again, this goes back to this kind of like not having access to everything. The first album, I didn't even know how the sounds were being made. Like it was like, what is making that fucking noise? And, and it turns out it was synthesizers, but at the time, because it was kind of in this kind of indie rock sphere, and they was just like, just using equipment. It's very kind of spacey and. Yeah, just, like absolutely fascinating. But yeah, maybe not the cheeriest music. You're right.
Jay, thanks so much for coming on, man. That was a lot of fun.
Pleasure.
Like there's been so many great albums that I've listened to thanks to your list that you sent over to me, which was awesome. What have you got planned for 2021, if anything?
Keep on keeping on, basically, isn't it? Just see what happens. I mean, I'm ready, as and when... when a gig happens,
you'll be there.
I'll be there. Yeah, in one form or another.
Where can people find you and find your music and stuff?
Just fucking Google Beans on Toast. Took me a long time to get up that search engine, but now I'm up there above Jamie Oliver's Posh Beans on Toast recipe.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. That was a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alex.
I'll speak to you again soon, hopefully.
Bye-bye.
That was my chat with Jay, aka Beans on Toast, aka the Love Singer. It was, like I said at the beginning, so much fun talking to Jay. He's just an absolutely lovely person, super optimistic, and I'm excited to speak to him again at some point in the future. So that's it. That's the end of episode 5. Thank you so much to everyone who's listened to this episode, and don't forget there is 4 other episodes previous to this you can go back and listen to, and we're going to be releasing new episodes every week as well. If you've made it this far, I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you could subscribe, if you can send it to your friends, if you can rate us on iTunes, if you can tell social media about it, if you can write letters to your local paper about how much you're enjoying spending your time listening to this podcast, that would be brilliant. You can contact me by emailing itsrecordtimepodcast@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram at vinyl__tap. I'm also on the Twitters under It's Record Time. I don't know my Twitter handle. It's in the show notes. And you can find me on Facebook as well by searching It's Record Time Podcast. Go do all those things. Go listen to Jay's music. Go download everything that Jay told you to download. It's late. It's late where I am. I'm recording this late. I'm very tired. I'm going to just leave this now. Bye!